In today's 3 steps to sketch, we are going to graph a basic cosine graph. Y equals cosine of 4x. So we have our outline on the left and our equation and our grid on the right. And before we start, it's important to notice that we have an equation in the form y equals a cosine bx. Okay, so we do not have any shifting going on here. We have a more basic cosine equation, and that's why we can use the template to the left. Okay, so let's jump in. Step 1 is to find the essential information. So a is the coefficient of cosine. Here we have an understood 1. Okay, absolute value of a, so 1, is also the amplitude, which is the distance from midline to maximum or midline to minimum. All right, and then we see b, which is the coefficient of x, is 4. And b tells us a couple of things. First, I like to note that b tells us how many cycles of our graph will happen between 0 and 2 pi. So if we were to graph all the way to 2 pi, we would see 4 complete cycles of cosine. Okay? Or 4 repetitions of the pattern is another way to say that. Okay, b also helps us find the period. So we know for cosine we calculate the period taking 2 pi and dividing by b. So 2 pi divided by 4 will get us the period here. Our period is pi over 2. And remember, period is simply the length of one horizontal cycle. Okay, that should also be consistent with what we just said about b. We said 4 cycles of our graph should happen between 0 and 2 pi. So it makes sense that one cycle would happen in pi over 2. Okay, that's a quarter of 2 pi. All right, so we have that. Now let's choose our scale labels. And we do this very intentionally with our 3 steps to sketch method so that our key points in the next step align nicely with our horizontal tick marks. Okay, all we need to do to choose a scale label is take our period and divide by 4. So we're taking pi over 2, we're dividing by 4. If you'd rather write out times 1/4 just to make it look a little bit nicer or easier to tackle, we'll see that we should count by pi over 8 when we're labeling our horizontal axis. All right, and then for our vertical scale labels, we'll just use 1. Okay, 1 is usually a great choice. All right, so let's go ahead and label our axes. We'll start with the horizontal, and we'll count by pi over 8. So we count 1 pi over 8, 2 pi over 8, which reduces to pi over 4, 3 pi over 8, 4 pi over 8, which reduces to pi over 2. Pause here. The 4th horizontal tick mark that you label as you go to the right of the origin should match your period. If you're using this method, that's another nice place to just stop and double check and feel confident that you're on the right track. All right, let's keep on labeling. So we stopped at 4 pi over 8. Now we're at 5 pi over 8, 6 pi over 8, which reduces to 3 pi over 4, 7 pi over 8, and 8 pi over 8. All right, so to label the negative side of our horizontal axis, we'll use all the same values, but of course they'll be negative. So I'm going to pause the video here and get those labels on. And if you're following along, go ahead and pause and label here too. All right, so this is how my negative side of my horizontal axis looks. Hopefully yours looks the same. And we can label our vertical axis as well, counting by 1s. All right, so now we've done, I would say, the toughest part. We've really done all of the setup and analysis in step 1. And the next 2 steps should be easy. So step 2, we'll plot our key points. And for cosine, we know our base pattern is going to be maximum, 0, minimum, 0. And we noticed that we did not have a reflection, or hopefully you noticed that, since A is positive, not negative. And so we know we can stick with that base pattern. So we can plot our first key point on the y-axis, and we know its y-coordinate will be whatever A is. So in this case, our first point is going to be our maximum, and it'll happen at 0, 1. Okay, then we know our next key point will be an x-intercept, and it will happen at the next horizontal tick mark, at pi over 8. All right, then we should have a minimum. It'll happen at the second horizontal tick mark to the right, and its y-coordinate will be the opposite of a, so -1. All right, our final key point for this portion of the pattern will happen at the third horizontal tick mark, so at 3 pi over 8. And I like to go ahead and at pi over 2 plot another maximum point, and that'll just help as we sketch in the next step. All right, so that's our pattern. That's really all there is to step 2. So just knowing that cosine that's not reflected goes maximum, x-intercept, minimum, x-intercept. And now we can do step 3. Let's sketch. So sketching our cosine curve. And now we have one cycle of y equals cosine 4x. Let's go ahead and repeat so we can have a couple more cycles and see what a nice sketch of this graph looks like. All right, so the great thing about trig functions is they are periodic or repetitive, cyclic, however you'd like to say it. So you can take the green pattern and just repeat it over and over and over again. So let's start our next cycle, our second cycle, at pi over 2. So that's our maximum. We have 0, minimum, 0, close. That would start our next cycle to repeat with a max. And let's sketch that in. Okay, turn it down and show that it continues on in this cosine pattern. And let's do a couple on the negative side of the horizontal axis. So you can move 4 tick marks to the right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and start with a maximum at negative pi over 2 and repeat the pattern. So max, x-intercept, min, x-intercept. Sketch in another cycle here. Or you could just work the pattern backwards. So you're at this maximum. You could do an x-intercept, a minimum, an x-intercept, a maximum. Okay, kind of feels like the same thing. But whichever way you like to think about it works nicely. All right, so here we go. We have several cycles of cosine 4x. And let's go back before we close to look at b again. So we said b was 4. That told us how many cycles should happen between 0 and 2 pi. Okay, now we didn't graph on our grid all the way out to 2 pi, although we could easily do more repetitions. But I think that this is enough so that we can see b tells us how many cycles happen between 0 and 2 pi. Because look at what we have. So starting at 0, we have 1 cycle, 2 cycles between 0 and pi. So if we were to put 2 more cycles onto our grid and extend it further to the right, you would see we would have 4 cycles of cosine between 0 and 2 pi. And so that's just a neat thing that, again, should just make you feel confident that your sketch is 100% accurate. So great job with this one. This was graphing y equals cosine 4x with the 3 steps to sketch basic method. If you are interested in some other videos, some more examples, the more you practice, the better you'll get. You can check out the links in the video description. There are all kinds of links to more cosine graphs, to some advanced cosine graphs, to some other trig functions. So hopefully you can find something that will help you get even better at graphing trig functions. Thanks for watching.